The lingering memory of the injustice of Japan's feudal class system has had a profound influence on the nation's cultural psyche, and it is a popular subject for its literature. Some of the most enduring samurai cinema has used conflict between the social classes as a key theme, most notably Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, a film of tremendous sympathy for the poor and oppressed at the bottom of the social ladder. Masaki Kobayashi's samurai heroes were often chewed up by the corrupt social systems of the elite which they vowed to destroy. Despite the fact that these were genre films that take place in the feudal age of Japan, they were made with the intent on commenting on the very real social inequality that persists in modern society. It is in this tradition that Yasumi Matsuno, the designer and writer of Final Fantasy Tactics, begins his game. Final Fantasy Tactics is an isometric turn-based strategy RPG released in the US for the PlayStation in 1998. The writer and director, Yasumi Matsuno, took the template of his previous game, Tactics Ogre, for Quest, and refined it for publisher Square, who lent it their popular Final Fantasy brand name. While the story of Final Fantasy Tactics as a whole does not emphasize the themes of social inequality between the classes quite as explicitly as the samurai films of the late 50s and 60s do, it nonetheless delivers one of the interactive medium's most thematically sophisticated narratives. It is also one of the most notoriously complicated. The story in the game is about a lot of things: a civil war, mystical zodiac braves, a corrupt church with evil at its core, and the struggle to overcome the confines of your social class, high or low. Years of playing it since its release, and I'm still lost at times as it sprawls out over dozens of hours and characters. However, it's the opening chapter of the game, called the Meager, which details a conflict between military cadets and a band of impoverished ex-soldiers turned revolutionaries, that has always been the most interesting for me. With its moral complexity and sympathy for the lower class, it reminds of the socially conscious samurai cinema of Masaki Kobayashi, merged with the cartoonish European low fantasy aesthetic. As dense as the story is, the layers of gameplay systems are as equally complex, factoring the weather, your birth sign, and even your character's belief in the supernatural into battle performance. Both the action and the drama unfold from an isometric perspective. The animated story scenes, while fashioned in a decidedly cartoonish style, achieve unexpected levels of emotional resonance, perhaps due to the simplicity of their static, completely uncinematic viewpoint, which is something like watching animated theater from a balcony seat. The first chapter, called The Meager, is a prelude to the story, which establishes the principal character's early days as knight cadets fresh from the military academy. Ramza is the son of Privilege, the youngest male of the Honorable Balbanes Beluv, a legendary knight from a family that have loyally served the crown for generations. Despite the fact that he is a bastard, it is clear in this early flashback that Ramza is the dying patriarch's favorite. His powerful, scheming older half-brothers, however, are part of the intrigue surrounding Ivalis's impending civil war. Ramza's friend Delita Hyrule is a commoner who was adopted by the kind Balbanes after his parents died in the plague. Despite his low-born status, Delita was granted a place in the military academy alongside Ramza. As a commoner trying to fit into upper-class society, both Delita and his sister Teta are constantly reminded of their lower birth by peers that refuse to accept them. essentially stuck in a social limbo that plays havoc with their sense of identity, especially as things progress. Chronologically, the game begins with Delita, Ramza, and the rest of your squad, eager to prove themselves as competent knights, being sent out to deal with a band of thieves in the trade city of Dorter. At this point, Ramza is convinced that killing thieves in the name of his noble family is the right thing to do. This naive sense of justice, however, is put to the test rather quickly, as he learns just how unrighteous nobility can be, even those within his own family. The two cadets soon cross paths with Algus, an ambitious young nobleman in trouble. After his rescue, they learn that he is the apprentice of the Marquis of Limbury, a nobleman whom the subversive Death Corps revolutionaries have kidnapped, and he begs to speak with Ramza's brothers to request help. Convinced by Algus, who reveals himself more arrogant and sadistic as time goes on, they disobey Dysadarg and launch an assault on the kidnappers. However, while they are away rescuing the Marquis, the Death Corps boldly attack the Belus, injuring Dysadarg and taking Delita's sister as a hostage, tragically mistaking her for a noble. When the question of her rescue arises, Algus vehemently refuses to participate because of her lowborn status. Delita and Ramza, determined to rescue her, help or no help, eventually encounter a Death Corps soldier called Maluda. Maluda is the key character in the Meager. It is through her sympathetic and ultimately tragic qualities that Matsuno conveys the best that Final Fantasy Tactics narrative has to offer. Maluda and her brother Wygraf are the leaders of the Death Corps, a revolutionary group of peasant ex-soldiers who were coaxed into service during the 50 Years' War by the nobles with big promises. As is often the case after the war had ended, the nobility reneged its promises, leaving them impoverished and without hope. Though extreme and doomed to failure from the start, it is only through violent revolution that Maluda and Wygraf feel that they can survive. During your encounters with her, she passionately explains why she fights the aristocracy. Delita finds himself sympathetic with her, while Algus regards those of her class as animals, leaving Ramza confused. It's difficult to argue that Maluda's case is unjustified, which creates an interesting moral dilemma for the player. If your enemy is morally superior to yourself, how are you supposed to feel when you defeat her? When you finally do corner her, her death sends Delita into a fit of self-doubt. Reminded of his roots, he wonders why he just helped kill a commoner whom he admired, for a noble family whom he increasingly didn't. In a moment of dissonance between the game mechanics and story, you are treated to a congratulations screen for defeating Maluda, though I, like Delita, felt anything but proud of myself. The Meager ends with the death of yet another young girl, this time Delita's sister Teta. Not worth the trouble negotiating for, Ramza's brother Zombag deems her life forfeit. This is the turning point for both Ramza and Delita. Ramza decides to make himself an outcast and attack his own family's troops. He then abandons his home, becoming a wandering sword for hire. For Delita, his sister's death at the hands of nobles he once trusted is the fire that fuels his new ambition to finish what the Death Corps started and bring down the aristocracy single-handedly. This is just a small bite of the overall narrative, but it remains the most memorable for me. If you've seen my video on layered visual storytelling in the Elder Scrolls games, you'll know that I prefer games that allow players the freedom to experience the story on their own terms, without being force-fed a narrative through cutscenes. The true, relatively untapped potential of the medium as I see it, lies in the convergence of narrative and gameplay into one holistic, player-defined experience, and not into separate compartments that the player has no real influence on. Still, I can't deny the intelligence and moral complexity of it, especially in this marvelous opening chapter. Usually, JRPGs are dedicated to suturing the players seamlessly into the narrative, by making the actions of your party as widely sympathetic as possible, which leads to the type of melodramatics that the genre is notorious for. As violence is usually just a means to a gameplay end, rarely does a game designer question the morality of who you are killing, as Mitsuno does with Meluda, and then follow through by upending the entire idea of right and wrong for the game's protagonists. Poverty and its effects on people is a taboo subject in most popular culture. Using weighty themes wrapped in a layer of stylization provided by an established genre has long been a means of Trojan horsing these themes to audiences. With a new wave of indie games that have shunned popular genres and are using the medium to explore more mature themes, it is important to remember that working in a genre can still give artists the means to do the same, as Kurosawa and Kobayashi did with samurai action films, and as Matsuno did with Final Fantasy Tactics.